It's anarchy. Anytime I turn the TV on, it maddens me. Black and white and left and right, it's all a strategy. It's bigger ratings when we fight, we pay their salaries. That's just reality, because it's anarchy. When I turn to social media, it saddens me. Red and blue are rival crews, they're trying to rattle me. If you go against the team, assault and battery, you're just a casualty.
Making sense of the world with Zuby. Hi, my name is Astin-Gregory and welcome to the Elevate podcast. Today, my guest is Zuby. Many of you will know him as a rap artist, musician, and cultural commentator. Like myself, he's been creating content on the issues surrounding the pandemic response for the past couple of years. But as you'll discover during this interview, he has many layers of depth that we'll explore within the context of this conversation. But before we get started, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channels. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button now, or whatever platform you're consuming this content on. And please join our newsletter at danastingregory.com/podcast. It's really important that you do this because we faced a number of difficult censorship challenges over recent weeks. And in order to break through these barriers, it's really important we can continue to reach you through our platforms. Now, on to today's guest. Zuby, as I mentioned, is a rap artist and cultural commentator. He's a rising public figure and influential voice whose unique perspectives, authenticity, and positive energy have earned him well over 1 million followers on social media and 15 million plus online video views. He's been featured on the Joe Rogan Experience, the Glenn Beck podcast, the Rubin Report, Ben Shapiro Show, and many more as he's expanding his influence around the world with his unique take on the world. In today's episode, we reflect upon what's been happening over the past couple of years. We also look at the culture wars. We examine the underlying challenges of our time and start to explore what can be done to create greater harmony. How can we bring people together to create solutions? And how do we start to move forward beyond the mess that has been left to the trail of destruction, if we will, over the past couple of years? So I'm really excited to bring Zuby to the conversation today. I hope you enjoy this uplifting conversation. Please do hit the share button. And if you're not yet a member of our private community inside the Elevate Network, our private social network, visit us at weareelevate.org to join us there. Zuby, welcome to the show. Cultural commentator, children's author, rapper, creative entrepreneur. A varied career you have. Welcome to the Elevate podcast.
How's it going, man? Happy to be here.
Good. I mean, you really do. I think I'd love to start by just finding out a little bit more about you, because I know my audience. You know, we've transitioned from the pandemic podcast over the last couple of years, where we did 400, 500 episodes on the pandemic. You and I have covered many of the similar issues over the last couple of years. And I know many of my audience will be familiar with your work and your critique of the issues that have gone before us, but they may not be quite as aware of the depth that comes with you. You know, former Oxford graduate, about to release a children's book. Who is Zuby?
Sure. So I was born in the UK, in England to be precise, to parents who are originally from Nigeria. My dad's a medical doctor. My mom used to be a journalist. I actually grew up in the Middle East in Saudi Arabia. I lived there we moved over there when I was a baby, and I ended up living there for approaching 20 years. When I was 11 years old, I went to boarding school in the UK. I did really well in school, got top grades in every subject. I got into Oxford University, studied computer science, graduated when I was 20. When I was in university, I actually started making music. I released my first album when I was still in university, way back now in 2006. It was called Commercial Underground. So that was my first ever independent music release. And that set off the spark of, okay, I can do more with music. So after graduating, I actually did my music full time for 1 year before moving to London to go work in the corporate world. I was a management consultant for 3 years while still doing my music stuff on the side. I was still gigging here and there. I put out 2 more releases during that time period. And then in 2011, I took the big jump to go and pursue my music full time. So I said bye to London. I said goodbye to the corporate world forever. And I went out and did what all Oxford University graduates do. And I became a full-time rapper. And that's what I did. And that's what I still do. I've added additional strings to the bow since 2019. So from 2011 to 2018, I was really just a rapper. That was the main focus of everything. I'm still a rapper, but now I am also some of the things you also mentioned. I run my own podcast called Real Talk with Zuby. I've now written 2 books. The first one was called Strong Advice, Zuby's Guide to Fitness for Everybody. So that was an independently released fitness book helping people with mindset, nutrition, and training. And that's helped a lot of people. So that was successful. And I've got my new book, The Candy Calamity, which is a children's book, which is also about the importance of health, exercise, and nutrition, but aimed at a much more basic level. And it's a rhyming book. It's all fun. It's got really cool illustrations. And so that is my next project. Beyond that, I also do public speaking. A lot of people know me as a social commentator to some degree. There's people who even call me a philosopher. I don't have the gumption to call myself a philosopher. I think calling yourself a philosopher is kind of weird, but I guess if people find, I don't really care how people label me, as long as it's positive and it's somewhat accurate, then that's fine. But I'm ultimately someone my goal is to inspire, motivate, and help millions and millions of people across the world through my talents, through my words, and through my actions. That's been the focus since I was just doing music, and I still do that through my music and want to do it with everything else that I do. So that's like the big North Star goal.
I mean, you've had a real positive focus in music, and actually I think there's the independent journey that you've taken on with your music career is really powerful. And the work that you've done in the fitness space around mindset, you and I share, I've spent the last decade working in the space of self-improvement, personal growth, mindset, particularly in the context of entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to touch upon some of these things through the interview, because what we're doing with Elevate since we've moved from the pandemic podcast is taking a broader look at the systemic challenges facing our world and humanity, but looking at it through the lens of how do we solve these issues through both personal change and social change, recognizing that we have to play our part. But this piece around cultural commentation, being a cultural commentator, I know that like myself, you've spoken out on a lot of the different issues over the last couple of years. What led you on this particular path when it comes to the message that you've been sharing through your podcast and through your guests around these more contentious issues?
That's a good question. It's something that I got into somewhat accidentally on that level. So, I mean, as a rapper, you are a social and cultural commentator. If you're an interesting rapper, let's say, I mean, yes, you can just rap about money and cars and women and stuff, but I think the best rappers are social and cultural commentators. I think the best musicians in general do that to some degree if they have some depth to their music and their lyricism. So I'd say throughout my music, I've always done that. In terms of getting into it more, that was largely a reaction to me feeling like the country that I was living in and many parts of the world, especially the Western world, we're just losing the plot, as we say in the UK, like it just going off track, right? A lot of stuff. I mean, if I think of growing up in the 90s and then the thousands and even the early 2010s, I feel like people were just more sensible and there was less conflict. Things were less polarized. There's a lot of conversations we're having right now that even 10 years ago, let alone 15 years ago, we're not conversations. We're not debates. People could at least agree on facts. They may have different opinions or arrive at different conclusions or ideas around the best way to deal with certain things, but we could at least agree on the facts. And now the most basic facts that exist are now up for debate. And things that are not established facts are not up for debate, right? So you saw this all during the last 2.5 years with the whole pandemic situation, right? So any alternative opinion, even a mere question, a disagreement in policy, a proposal for different policies, different medications, different things, that was all just thrown away, right? Dismissed, not just dismissed, but also attacked, right? People said you are not supposed to think. You're not meant to think. You're not meant to ask questions. Just shut up go along with exactly what we say, right? Put this mask on, stand here, walk in this direction, take this shot, do this, do that, stay at home, don't ask questions, don't, right? Like, no. And that always sets off big alarm bells for me, because that was a situation where, okay, this is something brand new. I mean, a virus comes and, okay, yeah, sure, there are people who are doctors and who study, but when it comes to this particular thing, it's like, okay, well, there's a lot that's not known. There's a lot of ideas. Not all the doctors are agreeing. Not all the scientists are agreeing, but they sort of they sort of picked off each doctor and each scientist who had any prominence who was not agreeing, to create this sort of false consensus of like, oh, well, this is what the science says. All the doctors agree. And it's like, no, they don't, right? Like, as you know, right? You're talking to them and it's like, wait, not everyone's agreeing on this. And also, why are we only talking about doctors? There's economic factors here. There's mental health factors here. There's freedom, liberty, and civil rights factors here. There's individual responsibility and autonomy that needs to be factored here. We're not supposed to live in these dictatorships where the government can just, I mean, around the world, it still blows my mind to this day, even though we're now almost 2 years past we're more than 2 years past the initiation of this. But the notion that in a country like the UK or the USA or countries that are supposed to be free, that the government can just force you to stay at home. You're not sick, you're not ill, there's nothing wrong with you, and they just say, no, you can't go outside. Like you're a 4-year-old, right? No, you're not allowed to go outside. You're not allowed to see your parents. You're not allowed to see your family. You're not allowed to see your friends. You're not allowed to do this. They put arrows on the ground telling you which way to walk, right? In many places, they forced people not just to wear, forcing people to cover their faces in so-called free countries anyway, anywhere is insane. But even outdoors, right? There's many countries where they've mandated hundreds of millions of people wearing masks outdoors. And if there's something we knew earlier, that was always nonsensical, right? Indoors, sure, people had their different ideas, but outdoors, it was like, what? This is crazy. And people just fell into this thing. And then it got onto the vax mandates and the vax passports and this and this and this. And every so-called conspiracy theory kept on coming to light. But I don't even want to dwell so much on the past 2.5 years, because I was seeing stuff going sideways before this. Right? Politically, socially, culturally in the UK and the USA, it was just getting too heated up and too angry. And also, there were not a lot of people who were publicly saying what I was thinking. And it's interesting, because one of the things I get all the time now, I meet people all the time, every city I go to, who say, man, Zuby, you say what I think. I love that you say what I think. Like when I listen to you, when I see what you're writing, it's like what I'm thinking, but either I don't have the courage to say out loud, or I don't really have the words. I don't know how to articulate it in that way. So probably the thing people thank me for the most these days is essentially for kind of speaking up for them. And it's interesting, because most of my life, I've kind of always thought the way that I do. It's developed and gotten deeper and more articulate over time. But even as a teenager, I just thought that most people thought like me, maybe. Or I didn't necessarily think that, I didn't lend my voice to these public conversations because I didn't realize it was needed. I still think that the vast majority of what I say is commonsensical. It shouldn't need to be said. Sometimes I'll put out a tweet or I'll say something and I'm like, why do I have to say this? Right? Why do I have to say this? Why do I have to say that you shouldn't judge people based on their skin color? That's a bad idea. Right? And there's people arguing this. Like all my life growing up, like it's like we got past this, right? There was all this racism in the past, in the UK and the USA, all over the world, right? And then over time, over the past century, people learn, you know what? It's really silly to judge people and mistreat, let alone mistreat or hurt people based off of something that is completely immutable and literally skin deep, right? You have your skin color, I have my skin color, my ancestors are from this part of the world, yours from, so we're supposed to hate each other, or we're supposed to fight, or I'm meant to mistreat you, or you're meant to, like that's a silly idea. But people are going back to that now. Like I started seeing that popping up again in the conversations, and I was like, wait, like, no, this is not right. This is not good. I started seeing people attacking the concept of freedom of speech, which again, throughout my life previously, it wasn't real. It wasn't up for debate. If you're in a free country, you have freedom of speech, right? You shouldn't have people getting getting arrested and police throwing them in jail or fining them for saying things that you don't like or you disagree with. Or it's like, no, it's as people always say, it's a free country, right? Doesn't mean you should say everything, right? You should monitor, you should have responsibility for your words. But again, I started seeing that becoming up for debate, even in universities, right? I don't know if you remember back in 2015, 2016, and you're seeing these places where, I don't know, Ben Shapiro or Milo Yiannopoulos would go speak at some university in the USA, and they'd go and cause $1 million worth of damage, and they'd be burning and fighting. And I was like, for a speaker at a university, and then I started seeing it getting imported to the UK, and I was just like, man, this is weird. So I just started using my platforms, especially Twitter, to just speak up a little bit more on some of these things. I don't think I was saying anything extremely profound or controversial, but that's really how it started. And then the explosion moment, the giant catalyst, of course, in February 2019 was when it comes to another silly issue, right? Biological males competing against females in sports, right? And so I took that and I posted a video of me doing a deadlift and saying I identified as a woman while doing it, and I broke the British women's deadlift record. And that just exploded online and put me on the radar of millions of people. And so that was like the real catalyst. The number of people now who know me from that moment up until now has just grown really exponentially. But again, that's a sign of the times, because if I even explain that tweet to people in many parts of the world, they don't even understand. They don't even have the context to understand it. If I showed that to someone 10 years ago, say in 2010, if I showed that to someone in the UK or in the US, it wouldn't even be funny because they wouldn't have the context for it, right? You'd need to explain to them that there's a minority, but a percentage of people who believe that men and women are interchangeable or are merely social constructs, and so therefore you can and are whatever you identify as, and therefore even if you're male, you can now compete with women in sports and go into their private spaces and so on, provided that you identify as such. You could have a beard, of course, you can still have a penis and testicles and XY chromosomes through all your body. You don't need to do anything. You just need to say you are. And everyone is supposed to shut up and accept it, not ask any questions. Otherwise, they're the bad guy if they ask questions, and so on. And people would have just, even someone who considered themselves liberal or progressive in 2010 would have been like, that's silly. Like, well, that's a silly idea. And now you're at a time where that's now a somewhat mainstream position, even though I believe that everyone knows it's silly and everyone knows it's nonsensical, but so few people want to say that because they don't want to get canceled. They don't want to get called names. They don't want to risk their jobs, risk their careers, risk their places at university, schools, and so on and so forth. So it takes someone like me to look at it and say, hey, the emperor has no clothes, and let me show you why. Let me not just tell you why. Let me show you why. And funnily enough, 3 years since that viral tweet, this conversation is still going. This debate is still raging on, and it's quite incredible to me, because I do believe that everyone knows the truth. I think even the people advocating for these policies know that it doesn't make sense, but they're just either so cowardly or so manipulated and indoctrinated in some way that they're not interested in the truth anymore. And it's all just become about feelings and about political tribes and so on and so forth. And it's been heavily politicized despite not even being something that should be political at all.
I think this is where some of the philosophy comes in, actually, thinking about how we've gone from the age of modernity to post-modernity, where it's this reaction to logic. Objectivity is this subjectivity that's arisen, but it's almost like subjectivity has got out of control. It's become untethered, and now we're facing this post-truth reality where everything is subjective, and that whilst I agree that the color of the bar at the bottom of this screen is blue, we could dispute the particular shade of blue that we've used, but most of us actually, I'm looking at it now and this, I think maybe it's purple, maybe it's not. I'll have to ask my graphic designer, but we're in this kind of space now where we've got into this arena where objectivity is not only not expected, but it's almost repelled. And I shared a similar journey to you when I recorded. It reached a point in 2020 where I took my phone, I picked up the phone and I shot a live video just explaining my views on the situation, and it went viral. And I'd been spending the last 5 years deliberately trying to make viral content.
That's how it goes.
Yeah, and then I create this video, and within 24 hours, 300,000 people have seen it. I'm like, what the heck just happened? And then it just continued to grow, and by the end of the week, it had over 1 million views. And I looked back, and I was just looking. I like watched it in slow motion to see like where did people press like the like button, and as you said, what people were commenting was, this guy is saying what I've been thinking the whole time. And the frustration I have now, 2 years on, is that a lot of people still are thinking what we are seeing, but haven't yet reached the point where they've had the courage to actually speak out. Now, I think it has changed. We've seen, certainly from a few lone voices at the beginning of 2020, it's massively moved forward, but we've culturally got this issue where free speech is suppressed. And it's fascinating, the issues that you've outlined, because I've discovered in the last in the last week, that people are pro-choice as long as it's a choice that they agree with, and people are free are happy to support free speech as long as it's speech that they also agree with. So it's such a challenging time, and I think we're at this cultural precipice where there's a bursting point that we're moving towards. What I'm curious about with your own journey over the last couple of years is your quest for truth. Has that become now part of a broader pursuit of freedom? Is there a broader fight for freedom? Is there a broader pursuit for a restoration of, if you will, of some of these values of objectivity and truth? Is this part of the trajectory that you're on now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't consider myself an activist in any way, shape, or form. I've had people call me an activist. I don't consider myself one as such. My interest is very much what I outlined before. I have enough jobs. I don't need to add another label to what I do. But I'm simply a truth seeker and a truth speaker. I think the truth is important. And I also think that liberty is important. And I think that the ability for people to have conversations and to discuss things in the matter in which we're doing right now and in real life, of course, this is what stops us from like blowing up and blowing each other up and killing each other, right? There's only 3 ways you can deal with any conflict. It doesn't matter if you're talking interpersonal, you're talking about a romantic relationship, a friendship, you're talking about groups of people or tribes or politics, or even between nations. There are only 3 ways to deal with a conflict. Number 1 is discussion, conversation, debate, diplomacy, having a discussion. Number 2 is separation, segregation, divorce. Going your separate ways. You live over there. I live over there. We don't speak. So therefore, there's no conflict because we don't interact. And the third is violence. That's all we have. As human beings, those are the only 3 problem-solving methods we have. So I'm a big fan of the first one because it stops things from devolving into the other 2, right? When people are no longer able to talk, or longer able to discuss and debate and try to reach some middle ground or do some type of negotiation, then yeah, they either have to go away from each other or they're going to just physically fight. And it's then, just who's the strongest kind of thing. And that's not a great resolution. And so that's why I say so many of the things that I do. And I know that by me speaking out, it, as a byproduct, it emboldens other people to do the same thing. And I've said before that I'm not trying to tell people what to think, but I do want to tell people to think. I do want people, right? I'm not saying, look, you have to agree with me on every single subject. I have some views on certain topics that are more popular than others. Some of them, especially in different parts of the world, right? I grew up all over, right? My family background's from Nigeria. I lived in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia. I've spent, I went to an American school for a while. I've traveled to 40 countries. Went to school in the UK for a while and was born there. So my worldview and socio-political views are not really kind of like those of just a standard English person across the board or a standard American. Like I've sort of picked and chosen from all these different places and been influenced by all this. So I have some views that could, make someone in the UK go, oh my gosh, like that's quite extreme, right? It's not extreme to me or anything, or, I could have a view I voice in different places and people think, oh, I'm surprised you think that way. And that's fine. And I'm not saying, look, you must agree with me. I'm happy to explain my position. If someone disagrees or agrees, like we can have those conversations. I've spent hundreds, thousands of hours of my life having very interesting conversations with people on all sorts of topics. But I think that's how we also understand each other. There's almost 8 billion people in the world now, and there are no two who agree on absolutely everything, right? That's not even, it's not possible, right? Even the closest people, you're still going to have disagreements. They might be minor, they might be major, but if you can talk and you can empathize and you can see, at least try to understand where different people are coming from. And I think this is one of the big benefits of traveling. And it's actually a huge advantage I have in growing up in the way that I did, which is that I can see things from these different perspectives. There might be perspectives I agree with more than others, or arguments I think are stronger or more morally just and righteous than others, but I can at least understand where people are coming from. And that makes you less prone to straw manning and demonization of people and having this super hyper tribalistic mentality of us versus them all the time, of just, this is this and anything outside of this cannot be tolerated. We talk a lot in our society about, we have these buzzwords: diversity, inclusion, equality, tolerance, and people like to say them, but a lot of people don't like to live them. They don't like to live them. Some of the people who talk the most about diversity and tolerance and inclusion are some of the most exclusive, undiverse when it comes to thought, and least tolerant people out there. As soon as you disagree with them, the name calling comes out, the aggression comes out, sometimes, calls for even violence, right? If they think that the way you want to do something is not the way that they like it. Again, you saw this in the past 2.5 years. You saw people wishing sickness upon people, wishing death upon people because they didn't want to wear a mask, or because they didn't take a certain injection, or they didn't think that it should be mandatory even, right? You had people actually saying, again, in so-called free countries, that people should be jailed, people should be denied health care, people should be treated this way, pushed out, not invited to family gatherings, all of this. And again, it blew my mind, because I'm just like, what? Because it was heartbreaking for me, because to me, I have lots of praise and lots of criticism about every society that I have lived in, but the praise I really have for Western countries, the modern Western, say Anglo countries, the USA, Canada, UK, Australia, right? These were supposed to be my whole life the bastions of freedom and equality and treating people equally, getting past discrimination and segregation and all of these things across all these different lines. And you just saw how quickly so many people, by the millions, fell back into that really nasty mentality of actually advocate. I never thought I'd see people actively advocating for segregation in my lifetime. I didn't think I was going to see that, let alone over who got a shot or not. No one was advocating this with flu jabs or with measles jabs or anything else, right? But suddenly it was like, oh, this thing, if you don't do this thing, if you don't do this, you are evil and you don't belong in society. We should cast you out. You shouldn't be able to do this. You shouldn't be able to do that. Maybe you should even be put in prison. And that was just, it was like, I mean, I've been red pilled for a long time, but that was just like wow, that's, what happened to all the, now people are, trying to go back to talking about democracy and liberty and equality. And I was like, I can't take y'all seriously anymore now, because I was alive for the past 2.5 years and I saw everything that you were saying and everything that you were doing and supporting. So now that's ringing very hollow, because it doesn't seem like people believe it. As you said earlier, you believe it when it's convenient or when it's aligning with your, what you believe to be your political tribe. But as soon as it doesn't, then nope, like that's just out the window. And again, the inability to talk to people and unwillingness to even listen. It doesn't mean listening doesn't mean you have to agree, let alone support, right? I can listen to someone, and it doesn't mean I'm 100% taking on board all their ideas and advocating for them. I'm just listening to try to get their perspective. And so many people don't want to do that.
I had a guest last week who said that we need to learn to be humans again. And, the lens I kind of look at that is actually, I think we live our lives now so vicariously through the digital realm that actually I think there's a distinction between how humans behave in public contexts versus how we behave online. And there's been some really interesting discussions around free speech in the last few months, and where the line is drawn for moderation, or what is defined as hate speech. And none of these conversations are really taking place in the context of actual life in terms of what is legal and how would, if you and I were to dispute something, I think we're both reasonable people, we probably wouldn't resort to violence. But there's in polite society, there's a very real threat that if you upset someone enough, there's a potential for a physical response. But in the digital world, it's not there. So there's almost the filters of, I'm talking to another human being who has their own emotions, they've got their own things going on in their lives, they've got their own challenges. What's going to be the impact of my communication on this individual? It just doesn't seem like there's a second of thought around how our communication could affect other people. So it's really fascinating to see how polarized the digital realm is. But when you actually I've also found when I've had the same conversations, even with the same individuals, where it's got it highly heated online, when you actually meet them in person, it's a different conversation. And maybe it is because I'm 6'1". I could never deadlift what you deadlifted it. So I think your record is safe. Maybe
what you're bringing up is really interesting, and it's something I think about a lot, because I do spend a lot of time online. I've been active on social media for over 15 years, and I think people forget how new it all is, right? Human beings are not designed. This is not the way we're meant to communicate. I love the fact that I have over 1 million followers online, but in the past that was not possible unless you were like a king or a celebrity or something, right? The ability to reach 1 million people, right, through my phone. I can tap something and just put it out there, and 1 million people could see it within a short space of time. You had the same thing with that viral video you talked about. That's amazing, and it's really cool and powerful, but it's completely removed from how we're actually designed. And we haven't yet had the time to work out, okay, how do we handle this technology? How do we handle this level of volume, the signal noise ratio? How do we follow these conversations? So there's a lot that's lost. Every time you move away, with each step you move away from a real world, face-to-face, in-person conversation or interaction, you're removing some of the humanity, right? So what we're doing right now is about second best, right? We can still see each other's faces. It's real time. We can communicate. So this is like the sort of second best to a real world conversation, which is why I assume we're doing the podcast this way. A next step down would be switching off our video cameras. So now we can hear each other. You can get the tone of voice. You can hear laughter. You can judge certain things, but you're missing some of it because we're very visual creatures, and I can't now see your facial expressions. You can't see mine. So we lose a little bit. And then you go another step, right? You move to just a text, live chat, right? WhatsApp chat or live chat. And now you've lost the vocal inflections. You can no longer detect sarcasm or humor easily. You can't hear when someone is getting upset or so on. So you lose some. There's also that delay. There's the delay. And then you go another step backwards and another step backwards. And ultimately you end up essentially with Twitter.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And so people forget, number one, so many people don't even have, like, a lot of people get mad at me because I'm not trying to force anyone to, but I recommend, and I often say that I would prefer that people use their names and or an actual image of themselves online. I'm not saying that because I'm trying to force people. Number one, I'm not trying to force anything, but it's about accountability and it's about humanity, right? If it's just a bunch of letters and a random icon, it's very easy for me to forget, and even for that person to forget that you're dealing with human beings here. I don't know what this person is. I don't even know if you're male, you're female. I don't know who you are. I don't know how old you are. I know nothing. I don't even know if you're human. You could be a bot, right? They have all these bots on social media. So I can't interact in the same way that I would if we were in person or could at least see each other or something like that. And there's also no accountability. If I say something online, it's my real face, it's my name, I'm there, I'm the same person online, offline. I'm accountable. What I say on this podcast, I'm accountable. What I say on YouTube, on Twitter, whatever, I'm accountable, right? People know, okay, that's who it's coming from. So that's, and accountability is really important, right? You were talking about those real world conversations, and you're right that there is this sort of everyone understands you can't push people so far in real life because there is always an underlying potential for some type of physical conflict. But beyond that, it's just simple accountability, right? It's it's actually very hard to be, unless you're a psychopath, it's really hard to just like hurt someone, like go out there and be really nasty or insulting, say really hurtful things to someone and see that they're responding. You can see the pain responses in their face, you can see them getting upset, and you just keep, and you kind of keep going, right? Like, we have this natural empathy and compassion of not wanting to hurt other people. And you have to be like pretty far gone to just totally ignore that natural response and keep wanting to hurt someone like that. So this is a big problem with the internet. There's another couple big problems I think that happen online with this. Number one is that, not number one because I've talked about already. Another thing that happens is conversations happen backwards. And not a lot of people bring up this point, but this is one of the biggest issues with Twitter, trying to discuss anything that's potentially contentious, is conversations happen backwards, right? And what I mean by that is, if you meet someone in real life, how do you normally start a conversation?
Personal greetings. How are you doing? How's things going?
Mm-hmm.
Polite chat.
Establish rapport. Where are you from? Establish rapport, establish some commonality, and get to know the person. You don't start with your view on gun rights or your view on abortion or your view on whether or not God exists or which religion is correct, or your view on the latest hot button political topic, or whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or Tory or Labor, or right? You don't start with that. You don't lead with something that is just very contentious and potentially polarizing. And even when you do get to those conversations, by the time you get to them, you've already established some rapport. You've established that you're both probably decent people. And then you can get into the nitty gritty and you can explain yourself and so on. And then also on Twitter, you have the audience. So it's not like you're just communicating one-on-one with someone. And when there's an audience, you can't admit to being wrong in front of an audience, right? People want to maintain maintain face. They want to protect their ego. They want to, use their followers or the other person's followers to manipulate and do this. And so ultimately it just devolves. It just devolves into this mess. People make snap judgments because you can just look at somebody's bio and have all these assumptions and biases about them. And everyone does this. Even those of us who are aware of this, it's almost impossible not to do it, right? If I click on someone's profile and, whichever way it is, right? Especially because some people put such specific things, right? They'll put all their beliefs in their bio, and then they'll put the flags, they'll put their ACAB and their little communist hammer and sickle and their rainbow flag, their pronouns and this and that. So you're just like immediately, okay, I know. Your brain goes, I know exactly who this person is and what I'm dealing with. Then you go on another person's profile and they've got a pro Brexit and the Union Jack and proudly unvaccinated and and this, right? Right? You see what I mean? And so someone's brain is like, okay, this is a right wing. Someone will just jump in as a right wing, anti-vax, super nationalistic, probably racist. Like people, we have all these caricatures, and for whatever reason, a lot of people also play into them online, maybe because they want to sort of signal to their tribe. And so depending on what your own personal views and biases on those things are, it makes people go to snap judgments. That's actually a specific reason why I don't put my religious beliefs and my political orientation and all of these things in my bio. Number one, I don't have space. And I think that what I do is more interesting necessarily. And also just because I don't want to just preach to the choir, and I wouldn't introduce myself by these things in a conversation. So I'm like, okay, well, online, let me not do the same. I'm not ashamed of my views. I'm happy to explain what I believe and what I think and why, but let me not lead with that.
Well, I mean, it's fascinating because the old adage of, judge a person by their character has been replaced by judge a person by their characteristics. Our characteristics are more important. Our physical characteristics, our beliefs, rather than our character and how we behave. And I actually made another distinction, the social media world. If a fight or a brawl did break out in a bar, for instance, you'd generally find there would be other human beings that would step in to try and intervene and pull it apart and calm it all down. You'd probably have bar staff that try and stop the fight and a security person. Online, if someone is just hammering into someone, there's no one there to say, hang on a minute, cool it, folks.
It's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
They jump in and start kicking.
Yes. Yeah, it's savage. And the other point here, the 3 points you mentioned around resolving conflict, discussion. I'm with you. A discussion is one of the primary routes to resolving conflict. The challenges we're now seeing is we're seeing discussion suppressed by platforms, so actually physically suppressed or digitally suppressed, I should say. But actually, given what we've talked about here, and I think I'm probably working on a catchphrase around this. But the old adage of speaking the truth is a revolutionary act is now, to me, replaced by just speaking is a revolutionary act, because we've got the digital suppression. But because of these tribal polarized societies, no wonder why people don't want to speak, because they're literally going to get pummeled if they say something that is not in accordance with the tribe. So how do we go beyond that and create the conditions, do you think, where we can actually have healthy debate once again? And I know you were part of the Minds Festival of Ideas, and I hadn't twigged that may have been where you're at the weekend, where I know you've been discussing some of these things around free speech, cultural divides, manipulation of the media. What is your take on how we can actually break through some of these pieces? I know we jested with a previous guest about becoming human again, but I don't think they're too far from the truth.
Yeah. I think that with so many things, people have to decide on what they want, because we can only control our individual behavior, right? And we've already talked about some of the issues with trying to completely control other people. That's what's even led to this problem. But I think people individually and collectively, perhaps more importantly, collectively, and I don't know the exact mechanism for this, need to decide that this is actually what we want. Because there are people who love the division and the polarization and the tribal fighting and the culture wars. Like, there's people who really, really like it. I don't think it's the majority, but there are some people who genuinely enjoy it, and I get that to some degree. I enjoy a good debate or something like that, but not all the time, and not on every single thing, right? Not all the time. And so I think people need to decide, like, okay, because what is a society beyond a reflection of the people within it and their desires and what they're pushing for? People need to decide, we do actually want unity, not just say the buzzwords, not just say diversity, inclusion, equity, tolerance, right? Like, do you actually want a tolerant society, right? Do you really want people to be more tolerant? Do you really want people to be more unified? And are you willing to put in some effort towards that, including monitoring your own behavior and your own language and the way that you talk to people and the way that you interact with people and so on? That's really what it comes down to. And I think one of the biggest issues we have right now in the modern West is people want all of the rights, but none of the responsibilities. And I think this is having a lot of downstream repercussions. So rights are important. I talk a lot about rights and, people having rights, but with every right does come a corresponding responsibility. So I'm a big fan of freedom of speech. I support people's right to freedom of speech. That doesn't mean I think you should just say absolutely anything and everything, right? There's a responsibility there. You have a, if I just jump on your podcast and I start insulting you, or I start saying horrible things, and then I'm like, well, I have a right to say that. I have a right. It's like, yeah, you do have a right. I'm not saying you should be thrown in prison for it, but is that how you should behave? Is that what you want? Is that how you'd want your future children in general? Is that how you want them to interact with each other and how you want them to behave? No. So you have to push the responsibility angle as well. And I think we live in a very infantilized society in many ways. And maybe this is just a byproduct of things being very peaceful and abundant and good for a long time. But as they say, good times create weak men. And I think that this is part of the problem. People are now so caught up in their emotions and everything is offensive. And again, you were asking how I got into this whole conversation on a wider level. And it was also seeing these things like safe spaces and trigger warnings and microaggressions and all of that kind of talk. Because when I was in school, when I was in university, that was not a thing. They didn't have a safe space where they gave you coloring books and soft music and cuddly toys for you as an adult to escape certain things, right? If you were going into a history class and they were going to be talking about something that's unpleasant and brutal that happened in the past, it wasn't like, oh, here's a trigger warning, and if this might upset you, then you can go into the room with the coloring books. It was just like, no, like this is history. This is what we're teaching. You're an adult, or even you're a teenager. Deal with it, right? Deal with it. Learn how to handle your emotions. And we live in this age of emotional incontinence, right? So many people don't know how to handle their emotions. They just screaming and yelling and calling names and this and that. And that does have to change. This does have to change. We can't just let the babies control everyone, because then we end up in this. I had a viral tweet a while back where I said, we've gone from survival of the fittest to tyranny of the weakest, right? So you're supposed to judge everything based on the weakest individual, the most emotionally fragile person. Nope, you can't tell a joke because, out of these million people, there's this one really fragile person who might take offense and go and cry. It's like, no, that person needs to do some work on themselves and become a stronger individual rather than everyone else being forced to do this. Again, you saw this with the whole COVID thing. It was all based on the most terrified and the most paranoid person, right? That's what everything was based on. It's like, well, you don't have a right to make me feel unsafe. It's like, what? Since when? Since when, right? I mean, again, there's a difference between making somebody unsafe and making somebody feel unsafe. These are quite different things, right? I agree that you shouldn't go out in your car and be swerving around and driving recklessly and doing crazy stuff. If you're I'm in Texas right now. If you own a firearm, you shouldn't go outside with your AR-15 and start popping shots off in the air and shooting about randomly, right? Because that's more than making people feel unsafe. That's making people unsafe, right? That is very reckless. And as I said, yes, you have a right to that. You have a right to that tool. You don't have a right to. You have a responsibility to be responsible with it, right? If you own guns, don't just leave them dropped all around your house, especially if you have the little children running around. Just like if you had knives, right? We have knives in the UK. Harder to get guns, but be responsible, right? Just be responsible with the rights that you have. So in the way to resolve this, I think that we sort of need this national level in different countries. I think we almost need a national level conversation that's just mature and moderated, and people aren't trying to get offended all the time. People aren't trying to call each other names all the time or trying to force their points. Just kind of bringing people together and just saying, look, this is all very exhausting. We've got a really good thing here, and we risk ruining it if we continue to go in this direction. So let's stop completely demonizing each other. Let's stop viewing our friends and our neighbors, even our family members, as our mortal enemies. Let's try to focus more on what we have in common than the differences. Yes, we can discuss and debate those differences, but let's not forget that as human beings, and even especially as people within a country, right, like citizens of a nation, you actually have a lot in common. And these disagreements that another thing we need is, we honestly, the media and our so-called leaders also need to be a lot better at this, because the example they're setting is terrible. The media has become so inflammatory recently, over the past decade especially. It's become far more partisan, far more inflammatory. The rhetoric is very reckless at times. They themselves are pushing messages that you should be demonizing other people, or that, you know, you should be doing, and it's not good. It polarizes people further. It sets a bad example when you have prime ministers and even presidents and politicians on Twitter in public calling each other silly playground names. And it doesn't set a good example, especially when some of these people are in their 70s and their 80s. And you're just like, man, what hope is there for the 17 and 18-year-olds if the people in their 70s can't even speak like adults and discuss and disagree like adults, and it all falls down to name calling. And it can be comedic, right? Sometimes it's funny, but also it's quite tragic, because you're just like, man, how are people who are more than twice my age behaving like this? And these aren't nobodies. These are supposed to be the leaders. These are supposed to be some of the most powerful and influential people in the world, and even they seem incapable of using these tools properly and being responsible in how they're deploying their rhetoric. So when that's the signal from the top, it doesn't surprise me that everyday people, especially younger people, are thinking that that's the right way to communicate and to deal with ideas and people that they may have some disagreements with.
Yeah, so much for leading from the front. You know, that's this old concept of being the change you wish to see, and set an example for people, role modeling the change you want to see. But I think that here's a piece that I think is interesting from what you've said, is that I actually think there's now incentives for that inflammatory behavior. And here's where I think it gets tricky and gets challenging, because that polarization, we have this innate need for belonging, you know, a sense of, you know, from early roots that has led to this modern tribalism. And as such, you know, if you can create a divide, you create a choice. And I think the it's been a long day. Caricatures of the typical personalities online. I thought about this, and actually, there's very little nuance. There's you can pretty much, everything is almost being reduced down to two choices. It's binary. It's team A or team B. You're on one of those sides. You got to pick a side on everything. I mean, the situation with the abortion, I mean, that's a big conversation. We've only got a few minutes left. Let's not open that kind of words. But to the principle of the fact that already it's just a case of there's only one choice either way, and all the nuance in between, which would, I'm sure, if you had those interpersonal discussions that you discussed earlier on, you would actually get into that nuance and find that actually people are a lot closer than they think. But these polarized incentives create kind of a group dynamic that becomes difficult to break. And I'm curious to know how this has played out for you, because I think, you know, with the Pandemic podcast, we reached somewhere between 10 to 15 million views in the last 2 years. And I think I've heard you know, with some of your pandemic content, you've reached similar, probably more with your followership. But as a result, you are so people start to come and listen because you are speaking into, as we discussed earlier, the world that they are seeing but not yet speaking for themselves. And as a result, then if there's another issue that comes up, there's almost this expectation that whatever team A, whichever team you're on, team A or team B, you've got to go with the team A line on everything now. Otherwise, you're a traitor, you're a controlled opposition, you're a stooge. Yeah, and this creates enormous social pressure. And that to me is like the antithesis of what truth and freedom is. If you're then subject to the group dynamic, is that something you've experienced over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, man, because that's what we call audience capture.
Yes.
Right. Or sometimes we call it, being held hostage by your own fans, followers, customers, audience. And a lot of people fall into this trap. I'd say most celebrities are in this trap. And it's something that you have to actively and consciously push back against. I do this in various ways. And what's really, I think one of the wisest things I've ever done, and I did this starting with my music, was make a decision that I will just be authentic and I will be myself and not fabricate things. And I made that decision from the very beginning. So as my followership has grown from hundreds to thousands to, hundreds of thousands to over 1 million, I've maintained that line. So it's hard for me to get captured. As long as I maintain my integrity and my audience, I am somewhat immune, or at least inoculated against this type of audience capture, because I never pretended to be something that I'm not. Because if you do that and you build up an audience off of something that is not true, or you're hiding, a lot of people hide their beliefs on certain things. One reason I'm even vocal is because it's actually a bit of a protection mechanism, right? Because it stops me from getting canceled. If I have a really strong view on something, right, and a well thought out view, and I know it might upset some of my audience, but I never put it out there. And then one day I decide to put it out there, or somebody outs it, or maybe I mention it on a podcast or something, then, oh my gosh, right, it comes crumbling down. That's when, thousands of people start unfollowing you, and in your view, you become this terrible guy. Oh, you're a fraud, you're a shill, whatever. Because like you said, they thought you were 100% in their camp on everything. And they then realize that, oh my gosh, this person's not simply my mouthpiece. They disagree with me on something. So I actually want to cultivate an audience where I want every single person who follows me to disagree with me on at least one thing. Right? If sometimes I get a comment and it says, "Man, Zuby, I love your content. I agree with you on everything." I'm like, I need to find something I disagree with this person on and say it. Right? And I need to say it because that's also how you build an audience that's actually tolerant. And one of the most powerful things I've done and I've created is I can say anything on Twitter. I can literally say, I can discuss any topic, I can share any view, and I'm not going to just lose like hundreds of thousands of followers, because the people who are there, those people have already gone.
Yes.
Right. They've already gone. Right. They're already, I can't handle this guy. Like he said something I disagree with. I'm gone. Sometimes they'll even tell you, I'm unfollowing you, and I'm like, okay, bye. Right. Because you're not going to agree with everything I say. I don't want an audience of people who just think I'm going to always dance for them and say the exact thing. I'm never going to be a jerk about it. Right. I'm not going to put my views across in, I do my best to not put my views across in a way that's unnecessarily abrasive or feels like it's targeting someone, or in a way that's nasty or whatever. I will put my position out there. I will explain my position. I will tell people, look, you're welcome to disagree with me. You're welcome to disagree. You can share your own position. If you want me to explain my position, I can. I won't always want to do it on Twitter because there's better mediums for it, but I can explain my position, and I'm open to hearing other perspectives. I'm open to being challenged. Right. I'm not a mental midget. Right. If I have a position, you can question it. You can challenge it. And that's fine. I'm not going to be triggered. I'm not going to be whatever. Right. I'm not emotionally incontinent. I have my emotions in check. I'm a mature individual, and I have these conversations in real life all of the time. So I think that's the best way to avoid the audience capture, is to almost intentionally upset someone you're following from time to time, because then you kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, and the people who are not able to handle it, or the people who just want you to be their mouthpiece, they actually disappear. I think it's important how you do that, right? I don't recommend just being inflammatory for the sake of it, but I think that if you are generally kind, genuinely kind and open, and you put across your points with love and with reason as well, right? Not just throwing out the talking point or the slogan or whatever, but actually explaining, look, this is why I believe this. I've thought through this thing, and this is the conclusion I've arrived at. Here's the thinking behind it. Here's what it is. I'm happy to hear what you think. I'm interested to hear what you think, because we probably agree on a lot more than people may think, right? You don't just jump to the conclusion. It's like, well, how did you arrive at that conclusion? It can look on paper like people are very, very opposed on certain things, where in reality, they're not. Even in the world of politics, oftentimes people on, the so-called left and the right agree on many things, but they disagree on who should do it. They disagree on where the responsibility lies. They disagree on how it should be funded, or if it should be funded. They disagree on certain things. Yeah, some things are more directly polarized, but there's a lot of issues, right? There are certain things where people agree, right? There's no one who wants more people to be murdered. There's no one who wants more police brutality. Aren't people who want more racism in society or whatever. Now, people may disagree on how much racism is in society, or where it's coming from, or the best way to handle it or whatever. But I'm not seeing people advocating that, we need more police brutality, or we need more racism, or we want more shootings. We want more. Like, no one is advocating for that. And it's very easy to fall into this trap of just straw manning the opposition and saying, oh, well, if you don't support my policy, if you don't want to ban guns, it's because you want more kids to get shot, right? Or, oh, if you're pro-life, right? Current conversation. If you're pro-life, that's because you want women to be forced to have babies, or you want to remove all their rights, or you want to force them to die in childbirth, or you hate women, or you're just a misogynist, right? Or if someone is, has the pro-choice position, pro-abortion rights position, it's because you hate children, and you want babies to be slaughtered, and you just want more baby murder. It's highly unlikely that is the person's position and line of thinking, but it just very quickly devolves into this, and it happens on every issue. You want less immigration? Oh, it's because you're racist and you're xenophobic. You voted for Brexit because you're racist, right? You just hate brown people. You don't want them coming to your country. You want them all white Britain, so therefore I've never met anyone who voted for Brexit and that was their logic. Right? I've never met anyone where that was positioned. Oh, you want to stay in the EU? It's because you're a globalist. You're a globalist shill, and you just want to flood the country with migrants and take all our jobs, and you want to be with they'll link it to the WEF, or and it's just like, oh boy.
Well, it's no wonder why people want to check out and create a parallel system with all this noise, right? It's just like, can we just have
happened with COVID, right? You don't want mandatory masking and mandatory vax. That means you want to kill everyone's grandma. You want everyone to die. You're pro-COVID. I never met anyone who was pro-COVID over the past 2.5 years. And that's the issue. So again, it needs to just be more mature. Maybe it's just not possible using some of these online tools to have certain conversations, and maybe we should stop trying.
No, never give up. We got to keep going.
Yeah. Maybe the forum needs to be different. It has to be a forum like this. It has to be something closer to real life where people can actually talk. Even Twitter Spaces, even that is going to be better than just the back and forth with text.
Agreed, but we kind of have to take an hour conversation and get it into 280 characters to get people to pay attention. That's. I know, obviously, you and I have both reached quite a large volume of people the last couple of years, but we're in this short form content mindset, where it's just back and forth. But we've discussed a lot of the challenges here today. Zubi, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. I know you've got another commitment. We could talk for hours on these issues, but it's really fascinating to delve into the depth. And I'm very encouraged that there's other people out there working towards nuance, discernment, and actually pursuing truth and doing so with the heart and compassion. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. And I know you're about to release a book this week. Do you want to very briefly tell us quickly about the book before you have to rock and roll, and tell people where they can find out more?
Yeah, sure thing. So the book is called The Candy Calamity. It's a children's book, mainly for ages about, I'd say, 4 to 10. It's about the importance of looking after your body, health, nutrition. It's really fun. It's funny. The whole thing rhymes. And yeah, it'll be fun for both families and children alike. If you want to get the book, go to candycalamity.com. If you are in the USA, that's the US only link. And for people in other countries, it will eventually be available on Amazon in some different countries. And it will also eventually be available on teamzubi.com. So if you don't see the option on candycalamity.com to buy it internationally, by this time this comes up, hopefully we'll have some links out there. So just stay tuned.
Thank you for checking out our interview with Zubi today. I hope you found it as positive and uplifting as I did. If you'd like to hear more interviews like this, then I encourage you to subscribe on the platform that you're watching or listening to this on. We are available on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, Spotify, Apple, all the major podcast platforms. And we encourage you to join our mailing list at danastingregory.com/podcast, where you'll be kept up to date with our latest releases. We also encourage you to join our private social network, the Elevate Network. It's a forum for free thinkers, change makers, activists who are coming together to explore the issues of the world and start to seek solutions together. You can join us at weareelevate.org. And until next time, my name is Dan Astin-Gregory. This is the Elevate Podcast. I'll see you very soon.